All right. Hi, everybody. It's Kevin Kelly here, along with Kasey Thompson. I'm trying to look at these buttons. Hello, everyone. It's a live Sunday edition of the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Sir.
Kasey, we're apparently live on, YouTube and Twitch and
Yeah.
where else?
YouTube, Facebook.
We're all live on the Facebook. That's
Yeah,
very good.
we're live a little everywhere.
We want to thank the technology that is provided here is, of course, Riverside.fm.
Riverside.
He does a nice job. I like it. Of course, Kasey had a long in-ring career, and a lot of it was spent working on behalf of others. Now, of course, there was a brief period of time where Kasey was his own boss, and wait a minute, Kasey was always his own boss. But I want to know, Kasey, was there ever a time that you had to reach into your own pocket and give 10 or 20% to a manager? Were you ever managed in your wrestling career? And what kind of relationships did you have with different managers? And of course, there were many great managers throughout the year. In fact, I am a member of the Humperdink family here this week.
I see that. Humperdink was the best, wasn't he?
At first, I didn't. When I was younger, I didn't like him. And I just
but once you met him and got to know him, you just realized he's like the greatest, right?
Yeah. And then you realized, and as I got older, I appreciated him more and more. And I watch back now, 11, 12-year-old me is not going to get Sir Oliver Humperdink. And it's like, why is he in the ring so much? Why? He's not a wrestler. What is he doing? Well, he was trying to save the territory. That guy worked his ass off.
Sure. Yeah.
It was.
And then after you got to meet him years later, and then you got to know him, and he was a Florida guy, and you were a Florida guy, it just made it that much more. He opened up that much more to you just because of the connection of Florida,
Right. And that was and just talking about Humperdink, like, for example, and we'll talk about J.J. Dillon. We'll talk about Jim Cornette. We'll talk about, maybe Paul Heyman's name will come up in conversation. Jimmy Hart, so many great managers throughout the years. And a lot of people say, oh, wrestling's not the way it used to be, and we need managers back. And obviously, Sir Oliver Humperdink was just top of mind. He was one of the few that at the time didn't come from wrestling. He was not a wrestler who had transitioned outside the ring. He was a fan. He was a ticket taker. He was an usher at a building. And what was he, friends with the Hollywood Blondes?
Wow. He does look like an usher from like the movie theaters, doesn't he?
Yeah. Tuxedo.
Now to go back to answer your question, the only person I gave a percentage to would be David Penzer, and that was in the early WCW days, and I wouldn't call him a manager. We always call him our stooge.
Because he was and still is.
Yeah.
Now he's just other people's stooge.
Yeah.
And of course, paying a percentage was always one of the biggest kayfabe rationales for having a manager. Why are you doing this? And you're giving them all your money. And in fact, that was one of the greatest babyface turns ever was Jimmy Snuka, when Buddy Rogers started looking into his books and told him, by the way, you're broke. They've taken all your money.
That's probably like legitimate in real life. He was broke too.
Yeah, it was, I think, half a shoe.
Allegedly. Spent all this money.
Yes.
So I'm going to do I'm going to check your work. I'm going to look into your trivia. I'm going to do a little trivia here to see your wrestling knowledge. We're going Championship Wrestling Florida from the mid 80s.
Okay.
Manager of the Zambui Express.
Well, that was Sir Oliver Humperdink.
No, before him. He managed Zambui Express. He had Abdul the Butcher, and I believe One Man Gang at one time. 5 seconds. Would you like a lifeline?
Was it Gentleman Jim Kent?
Oh, close. Gentleman Jim Holiday.
But his real name was Kent,
right? I don't know. I always wondered where he came from. I meant to ask Bugsy that on my last phone call with him, which I owe him one really soon. I had to ask him about Jimmy Holiday, see if he has any insight on him. Not many people even remember him or even know where he's at these days. But I tell you what, I always really liked him, and I really enjoyed watching him with his, and I was fascinated with his Ambui Express growing up. I don't know
Right,
why.
me too.
Just because they're bigger than life. Literally, they're huge, bigger than life guys. And I remember them hitting the ropes. I was at Battle of the Belts 3 in Daytona Beach. And it wasn't the Zambui Express. It was Edible Gantner with Kareem Mohammed as Elijah Keem. Kareem Mohammed, Ray Candy. When Ray Candy would hit those ropes, it's like the ring was going to fall. Like they're going to come into the first or second or third row because the ropes, stretched so much and everything. It just brings back the fondness of my childhood with championship wrestling from Florida. Sometimes I just sit there and I just look through different YouTuber, different my big thing right now is wrestling belts. I like to look at the old territory wrestling belts.
Yeah.
And to see which ones I like and stuff like that. And I think my favorite belt of all time is really small, but it's the Florida Heavyweight Championship.
For such a prestigious title, it was a very small profile title belt.
Yeah. Yep. The Southern title is a small belt also.
Yep. And
they had some.
And those were all made by Reggie Parks?
Yeah. Yeah. Reggie Parks made them all. And I think Dan Lambert of American Top Team, he has all those belts now.
Really?
He has all the old, pretty much every territory in-ring belt. I mean, used from in-ring, the legit shoot belts, not a replica or anything like that. He has all of the old territory belts. He has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. It would just be amazing just to walk through his belt room and just see the collection. Yeah, I would Florida just be like a kid in the the candy store,
Right. The Florida and Georgia belts. I know that the Tennessee belts always had a unique look. Mid-South had a unique look. And as far as the other regional belts, I don't know if I could pick them out of a lineup. I could certainly see Florida. I can see the Georgia belts.
And the WWF ones.
Yeah. The Tennessee belts and the Mid-South belts. But
could you pick out the most unique belts ever were the Jerry Gray Southern Wrestling Federation belts.
That's
it looked like he his dad Dick Gray was his name. He did the ring and everything, and he did made the belts and all that. And he did a really cool job. He, instead of using leather, it looked like leather in real life, but he used some kind of tire, like a tube, and everything went onto it, and they're 3-dimensional with trophy pieces put on it. They look pretty good for what they were. And of course, Jerry had the Reggie Parks belt made for himself.
Oh, of course. Yeah,
but it was pretty interesting things. I might have to get together and grab a picture of one of those. Yeah, that's one of the big belts, the U.S. title, that the Lex Luger U.S. title, Magnum, Nikita, and all them had. That's a really cool belt too.
You got to get a picture. Do we have pictures of you wearing these Jerry Gray trash bag belts or what?
Yes. Actually, trophy belts, absolutely. I think there is one of them. I might have one picture. Maybe someone out there might have it. If so, just send it over to one of us, and it'll get to us, and then we'll put it up and give you a photo credit on the In Ring Wrestling Podcast.
People checking in live, and we thank everybody for tuning in. I wanted to talk about managers. Wanted to talk about a bunch of different little things here this week because it's the around the 4th of July. I always get very melancholy, and I think about the beginnings of the war games and how that all began.
Oh yeah,
building a what did they say? What was the line? They're
oh
building
man,
a dome of steel, something like that. And
was that Ole's voice? I wonder.
Hey, it could have been, or their VO guy, maybe just their regular VO guy, but could have been Ole, a precursor to.
Well, Ole did a lot of those voices, like Black Scorpion, Sting. I was the Sting Black Scorpion jobber voice. Sting.
Oh, Um, obviously, you know, and of course, J.J. Dillon. Now I'm a member of the Dillon family here as the
Oh
as.
man,
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of familial roots. You have no idea,
I would
Casey.
love to see your family crest. It would
It's
be
very busy.
interesting.
You know, part Humperdink, part Dillon. Um, when you look at JJ and what he did, you know, again, he was one of the old time wrestlers who made the transition out and went from being a somewhat, you know, tough guy wrestler, could handle himself, certainly could wrestle, and
Yeah.
then had a hard time tying his shoes when he was the manager. So to me, it was always fascinating how how those two coexist, how you go from being one to the other. But I do
Yeah.
love it. I did love JJ and his antics at ringside.
You know what's funny is a lot of these great managers and of course, everything in wrestling, anyone that was anything in the world of wrestling, especially during the territory days, all made it through Florida with,
Right.
championship wrestling in Florida with Gordon Solie and everything. I remember JJ Dillon with Cowboy Ron Bass and Black Bart. He was their manager, and they would do Saga the Family, those
That
weekly
that
things.
that whole thing where he's reading that book, that was
Yeah,
really ahead of its time. And whether that was
sure.
him or Dusty or both him and Dusty,
Right.
that was like that was again the heel really and Dillon went further than a lot of people trying to justify his actions, and
Yeah.
a lot of times would have that political slant to it, and was certainly
Hmm.
in tune with, well, the promoter, whether it's, you know, the NWA, the president of the NWA is Jim Crockett, and I'm going to take this up and we'll have a letter fired off first thing Monday morning, or, you know, Championship Wrestling from Florida, and but always through the auspices of the NWA.
Yeah.
Very brilliant man. His book is great, and wrestlers are like seagulls.
Did
Um,
you know JJ very well from your time with WWF? Was he there then, or was he already gone?
so here was the story with me and JJ. JJ Dillon and I, of course, knew of each other from the moment that we met in the WWF. And I started, as I've said here on this program, I started in June of 1996. And I saw JJ very briefly at our first TV, gave him the hello, the cursory wave. He waved back like we knew each other. Okay, good. But then we sat
And then he
down
was
at our,
gone.
at, no, not yet. Next TV, July. That was in, first was the pay per view in Vancouver, Raw in Seattle, Superstars out in Yakima, Washington.
Wow.
And it was in Seattle and Yakima that we talked. And it may have just been in Seattle because I seem to remember that JJ was gone either that Tuesday or that Wednesday after TV. That was it.
Oh
No
wow.
more. Yep. So JJ and I had a good long chat about all of our common ground and all the people that we knew. And he was, you know, interested in me and how I got there. And we just
Oh
chit
wow.
chatted. And then I've seen him a few times over the years, conventions, different independent shows. It's always been a lot of fun to catch up with JJ. I think he's great.
Oh nice.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
quit
He
because he got the nice offer from WCW, and he had gotten, because he was the head of talent relations, he'd gotten his salary cut a couple times because everybody was giving back
they cut
money
it.
because
They whacked it. Whack-a-mole.
yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
Money was tight.
Yeah.
So
No.
he
No
got all
water
that
in the.
back.
They took away the water and the pay.
Hmm. It was awesome, but JJ got what he needed. Got his, you know, want to make sure his benefits and everything were good, and he was all set. Plus, a little cheaper than living in Connecticut. So, living in Connecticut was a pain in the ass. You know,
Yeah.
nice state
That's
if that's what
one
you
of the.
like.
That's one of the most expensive places in the country to live.
Yeah, it's
Are
ridiculous,
you in a sauna there, Kevin Kelly?
brother. It is okay. So I'm here in the basement, and the air conditioning is in the other room, and I I moved the fan around because I was sitting out there doing some other stuff, and now the fan is not in here, and I was like, oh, it'll be all right. It's not bad. And then I sat down, and now I'm like, oh
You want to take a quick breather and move your fan, and I can keep the show going?
no. I'm gonna do. Why am I sweating? Can you see through my shirt?
No, but I
I'm
can't
awesome.
wait to see it.
That'll be
It's funny.
tremendous.
You're in Pennsylvania, up in a basement where it should obviously be cooler, and you're
Think
sweating
so.
your balls off.
Yep.
I'm in South Florida, and I'm actually wearing a sweatshirt tonight, which normally I'm the one always sweating. But it's amazing how these things happen, you know.
Well, you see, you know, us Yankees up here, we just got a lot of times the houses don't have central air conditioning. We have window units,
Oh, it's
and
brutal.
that's what we have here. But
Oh wow. I
I
don't
can
know if I could do that anymore.
I know, and my son, who is usually my production assistant slash gopher on this show and others, he's at a church trip this week,
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't have him to text and say, "Hey, turn that fan around."
Yes, my daughter has been asking to help out on the show. She's like, I can do that kind of stuff, and I'll send her what I did and stuff. She's like, oh, okay. She made let's see if I can bring it
Tilt it
in,
down a
and
little
it's not
bit.
going to show up.
It's very bright.
Yeah. Oh, well,
I
I'll have to
I
post
trust
it,
you.
and when someone see it, you can make a little comment. And she did a little graphic, a little doodling at work. And I said, I hope you're getting paid for that. She's like, yeah, it's slow because she has a new job and everything, working at a hostess at a restaurant and everything. So when she was slow, she was spending a little of her time doing an in-ring wrestling podcast doodle.
There you
So
go.
it's
Um,
always appreciated.
yeah, the heat wave throughout the world. By the way, we're not the only ones, and we're not ungodly hot. Um, it is. It's been like 90, 90, and it's it's
Mm.
sticky and it's kind of sucky. But a heat wave in Europe has been making headlines,
Oh, wow.
and over 100 degrees. So that's kind of crappy. And of course, someone
Mm.
who always talks about the weather on his podcast and others, and is sort of one goal that we should shoot for, I think, in terms of audience reach is Jim Cornette in terms of
Ah.
managers. Now, what did you think of Jim Cornette as when you were growing up as the manager of the Midnight Express? Did you think like Terry Funk told him, "Are you a sissy?" Did you think Jim Cornette was a sissy and a wimp? Did you want to
I
see him
always
get
thought
his?
I always thought that his mother bought himself his spot.
Yeah.
I had bought into that, you know. His mama bought himself a spot, and really, I guess they kind of did. His mother took him to all the shows, and there's a lot of a lot of course, everything kind of corresponds with his career and my career a little bit. His family, my mother used to take me to the shows and stuff like that because I was not old enough to drive when I first started wrestling and everything. He was a photographer, what, 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny is people don't realize those little things like that, the photographer, the guy that does the videos and all that stuff, all the boys are going to like those people because they're going to do something for them because all the boys love their users. um
Right.
it's just what it is. It's just how it is. So I mean, I remember um an old photographer from back in the Florida days, or the territory days, Dwayne Long.
Dwayne Long. I was
He's
just
from
about to say
Florida.
his name.
Yeah, he used to come around, and I'm like, hey, I said, that dude shoots for the magazines. Let's be cool to him. And everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah. And so everyone started. We actually made Dwayne one of the boys, and he still is to this day. He's a great guy. He actually, my wedding I had many years ago. And this is the last we'll talk about it on the show. He was my photographer.
How
Did a
about
great job.
I'll go back another name and a guy who shot my first publicity photos. How about Bill Otten?
Oh, Bill Otten did the Lords of the Ring tag team tournament that we both,
That's right.
did that I promoted, and you were the
I was the
play-by-play comment.
announcer.
Yeah,
We had some
you
fun with that one.
yeah, that was a very yeah, that was a good time. That was a pretty. I still remember that the homicide and low key about broke that kid's neck.
Brother, we can't talk about that
Yeah.
kid. He's been forever canceled. But I was like, "Are you sure you want to take this?" "Oh yeah." I said, "If you do, you're going to have to sell it. You can't be out walking around doing handsprings or they'll beat you up for real, and it was no problem. And
Yeah.
then I saw a picture like 2
Right. And
weeks
I
later,
remember
and
that. Yeah.
he still had the neck brace on,
Yeah. Yeah.
the double
He's been
stomp
having
comp
braces
killer
on lately. The bracelets are on his
ankles.
yeah, he has an ankle monitor on.
What do you do?
Yeah.
Who
He's
knew?
ran a little bad stretch for a while, but hey, he's got Larry, so it's all good.
Well, give him the electric chair; it'll be fine with me. I couldn't care less.
Sabisco
Um,
still lives with them too.
Wait, really?
Yep.
Like you just said, the boys will use anybody for anything. It's just amazing.
For years and years and years.
So weird. Delirious told me a
Yeah.
story about he was staying there once and he just saw Larry Zabisco standing outside in the patio early
Smoking
in the
probably.
morning, smoking a cigarette and shaving his body with an electric razor.
Ah.
He just this is the
Oh.
guy that Bruno, battled over, and there he is. Um,
Yeah.
but that's, and when you looked at the WWF managers, you had, of course, the old time wrestlers in Freddie Blassie and Captain Lou Albano, and the third was the Grand
Mm.
Wizard. Now, I
Yeah.
learned listening to the most recent Jim Cornette podcast. Brian Last has become a collector of a lot of files that were previously, controlled or owned, stuff that Paul Heyman has written over the years. And he got
Oh,
them
really?
through Norm Keitzer, who was a magazine publisher. And so Heyman, like you said, 13, 14 years old, just like Cornette, was shooting
Yeah.
pictures and sent them into the magazines. It's funny how those two became like frenemies, and yet their stories were very similar.
Oh, absolutely.
Excuse me. And when you looked at Heyman, you realize that he was very close with those New York managers, and especially the Grand Wizard. And
Yep.
I did not know that Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard, because when he passed away in 1983, Paul Heyman wrote a really, really nice obituary, tribute to him that he wanted Norm Keitzer to publish in the magazines, and
Oh, wow.
talked about how he had gotten his start in radio, and he was, and then transitioned through Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, and became a manager and had a couple of different names. Was not the Grand Wizard. And then, of course, before the Grand Wizard, he was the Sheik's manager for a number of years.
Oh, wow.
Abdullah Farouk.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had a couple of names before that, with different runs, with different teams, but was the Sheik's manager. And in fact, was like the Sheik's manager, handled a lot of
Oh,
his business.
yeah.
That was part of the deal, because when you're the Sheik and you own the territory, it's hard to do business because
Right.
you can't break kayfabe. At least they didn't back in
Yeah,
those
because
days.
he's the biggest heel in the territory too.
Yeah. So the Ernie Roth had to handle a lot of those, business affairs for the Sheik, and after a while, after several years, they parted ways, and Ernie Roth got his start as the Grand Wizard of Wrestling, which I, of course,
Oh,
always
wow.
thought was. I instantly gravitated towards the Ku Klux Klan because I'm growing up in Florida. You can't, wait a minute, isn't the Grand Wizard like the big boss of the Klan?
Isn't
And
the grandfather?
yeah, didn't they realize when they came up with this gimmick? Apparently not. That, apparently it wasn't even like wink, wink, ha ha, he's the Grand Wizard. They just came up with
Right.
something cool. It got over, and then down the line they figured out, oh, really? This is the guy in the Klan? Whoops. They were Yankees. They lived in New York.
Yeah, exactly.
But supposedly, now I never met the Wiz, of course, because he passed away in 1983. But I had occasion to work with Lou Albano. Of course, did
Oh,
some
wow.
stuff. Did some long sit-down interviews with Freddie Blassie. Awesome,
Yeah.
freaking amazing.
Mr.
But it was
Fuji?
so. Fuji, I only ran across in passing once, because Fuji was
Oh,
out of the
really?
business by the time I got there. And I think I told the story here on this podcast, was Vince being a generous guy, Perfect
Sure.
and Dave Hebner finding out that Fuji was on his ass financially, and Vince gave him
Right.
10 grand cash, told told them to bring it over to Fuji. He was tearing tickets at a movie theater.
When I first did TV, Fuji for WWF, Fuji would always be there. I'm like, hey, who's this usher always sitting here in his tuxedo? It
I
was
didn't know.
Fuji.
What about
You
his
know, because
finish?
sometimes you don't realize who people are at first because you used them in their character and stuff like that. When you see
Right.
them walking in and things like that. Fuji was one of them. I'm good friends with the Warlord, Terry, and he would tell me all kinds of, Fuji stories because Fuji was their manager and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And Fuji was a big ribber back in the day and everything.
Yes.
So it's,
And the whole story with Al Snow and the Big Boss Man was a real scenario, not for them, but it was a real story for Mr. Fuji. The dog was barking, please, come home, want to sleep. Your dog barking. Oh, it's okay. I'm sorry. And the little dog keeps barking, and day after day after day. And then all of a sudden, the dog goes missing. Well, he invites his neighbor over, and of course, had served him pepper steak. Yes, that's how bad of a ribber Mr. Fuji was.
oh,
And
yes.
you don't want to be. By the way, I've changed my name to Fuji Vice for this few
All
moments.
right.
I want everybody to understand. Of course, now we were Florida guys, and I looked at WWF as a bit of like interlopers. Like I was cheating on my girl. I didn't like it. But what did you think of WWF when you started to see it? So that would have been what, 86, 87?
The same thing. I thought it was a circus.
Yep.
I was not a fan of it at all. And yeah, I just never I knew Billy Jack Haynes, and I remember him
So
going
he
up
was your
there,
favorite.
left Florida, go up there, and he came back and was like, yeah, man, it's like a circus up there. And
Yep.
so I always just related WWF at the time to being a circus, the most
It's
powerful circus in the industry. But hey,
Yeah, was a big circus. And again, I think the first time I went to a WWF show, it was at the West Palm Beach Auditorium, and it was weird because it was like a Friday night. So it just felt weird being there, and I was sitting in different seats, and because we made like a last
right.
minute decision to go, and
And the
the main
setup was
event,
probably different than what you're used to.
yeah, it just had a different feel, and
I have
it
never
was
been to a or WWF show. I only went to Florida wrestling. I never went to a WWF show
oh yeah,
before I started working for him. Yeah.
I had I'm trying to fix my name now because I've broken it. Because I've been playing haha here, changing my name all this time. There we go. Now I'll just go back to being regular Kevin Kelly, and that'll be that. No, I won't because it's screwed up now. All right,
Fuji Vice, Kevin Kelly.
Fuji Vice. Um, yeah, the main event was a very good match. It was the Bulldogs against Valentine and Beefcake,
Hmm.
and it was for the tag belts. And before that was Andre and Big John Studd. Body
Oh,
Slam
wow.
Challenge. Yeah, it was a decent card. And I just sat there the whole time like, this doesn't feel right. Like I shouldn't be
No,
here.
no, it's apples and oranges night and day from the old Florida Territory wrestling to the WWF at the time. I was definitely the same way. I've told this story before when my parents were huge wrestling fans. We're from Michigan, so it's a Sheik's territory. Moved down to Florida. They're watching the old WW Madison Square Garden Network, and I looked at this stuff and I was like, "This is stupid." And I
Yeah,
went to
what
my
is
room. I
this?
was 10, 9, 10, 11 years old. Then I seen Dusty Rhodes and Gordon Solie and Blackjack Mulligan, and that was it. That's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. Couldn't think of anything else ever but that.
It's so funny
It
how,
was
yeah, it was that aha moment for me because I was 9 years old when we moved to Florida, and I had watched a couple of times, but I wasn't like crazy about it because it was on at midnight. Seeing the
yeah.
All Star Wrestling WWF, and it was
Hmm.
on Channel 9 midnight, um, and was interested in it and was reading the magazines here and there, was looking at the pictures. But then when we moved to Florida And that Saturday that we got cable and the TV turned on, and all of a sudden I hear Gordon Solie's voice and it's a Mike Graham match, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for the rest of my life from that moment on as well.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how we watched something from the same genre, the same industry, a lot of times the same talent, people went back and forth, and yet one spoke to us and the other one didn't.
Yeah.
And I can't it's just weird how one thing was a disconnect and the other thing became our sole passion
Yeah,
in life.
it's the wildest thing.
Yeah.
You know?
And I felt bad, like, when I went for my audition, and like you said, you didn't watch the product until you went to work there. I was not a fan of the product until I went to work there. And even sometimes I was like, man, I like WCW better. I always liked WCW better.
Yeah, it was weird. Even talking about the difference between it. So you have Championship Wrestling from Florida on Saturdays at noon, and then the famous TBS 605, the Superstation. They had Georgia Championship Wrestling. It was even different, but I still liked it. It was a couple notches different than Florida wrestling. It had more. I know it's crazy to say because it was a studio setting, but it had more glamour to it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because it was a live 2 hour or I thought it was a live 2 hour program or whatnot. But it was brighter the way they shot it and everything. But it still was a studio program. But it had the world champion every week on it, Ric Flair at the time. So it was really interesting. And for the life of me, I can never figure how Gordon Solie could get from Florida to Georgia in that short of time. Every week. I was like, man,
He had to hustle.
little
But
we know they pre-tape everything.
of course. And, he shot, well, wait a minute now, because they shot Florida Wednesday morning. When did they do the TBS show? When did they do Georgia Championship Wrestling? Because
I
in the
believe it was
Crockett
Saturday
days,
mornings.
oh, okay. Because in the Crockett days, they did TV. Well, no, it was only later on that they started doing TV on Wednesday. But yes, it was Saturdays. It was Saturday morning that they recorded it. After a Friday night show, they would all hustle to Atlanta and then do TV and then hustle to wherever else they had to go to.
Right.
I always liked, in listening to Lance Russell in Memphis, there were a lot of shenanigans and chaos at the end of the show, because the way they timed a lot of wrestling programs is that last match would be TV time remaining.
Right.
Because if something went a little long, they couldn't say, well, this match is one fall with a 10-minute time limit. They would just let it go for however long it needed to get to, and that was going to be the last match.
Right.
But there was one thing that happened where I can't remember who the baby faces were in this particular occasion. They got jumped, and it may have been Jeff Jarrett. It may have been Tojo Yamamoto, another great manager. And they were beating up on Jeff Jarrett. Let's just say that that's the case. And ringing the bell, trying to get somebody to come out there. And Lance Russell is openly asking somebody to go look for particular wrestlers. Like, I know Jerry has left, but is Tracy here? Is Smothers still here? Right. No. Oh, well, some of the guys have already left. They've all left. You mean there's no one to help Jeff Jarrett? Oh, I just was like, God, that's so freaking awesome. That little attention to detail. I just, that type of stuff, and it gets over today. I don't care what anybody says.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A friend of mine told me, my friend Joel in the UK was watching Collision with his friend, who's very much a casual fan, and said, wow, when Kevin was, and he says, I haven't watched Collision in a while, he said to Joel. This is over in the UK. He said, when Kevin was there, he said, Kevin sounded serious. Now there's nobody there who sounds serious. And it's like, yeah, you have to be serious. It's a serious job. I'm calling sports.
Talking about announcing and everything, and that's where you made your way into wrestling and everything. Were there any particular announcers through your years, your fandom years, that had an influence on the way that you became an announcer, or was it Vince McMahon that produced you and molded you to what he wanted, or is there anyone that stands out in your mind?
Obviously, Gordon Solie was a huge influence, as was Lance
Sure.
Russell. Those two
Okay.
were that was what had my ear. And that was where I sort of developed that cadence, the timing of things. Tony Schiavone was a big influence on me. I loved
Hmm.
Tony Schiavone. I thought, especially the way he did house shows. Every once in a while, they would tape house shows, and you'd be
Right.
like, "Oh, there's some great old house show footage that's up on the vault, the WWE channel." Why would they have that? Well, a few different reasons. One, they planned on using it. They wanted it for features. They were going to shoot an angle. Whatever. The cameras were there. Maybe a title switch.
Yeah.
Um, and they did that every week with Memphis as well.
Oh,
And
wow.
Lance Russell sat at ringside, called the matches. They didn't record everything, but they recorded the main matches. And in
Right.
fact, Cornette has those 2-inch originals somewhere.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, the Masters. I think, or they got thrown out. Either or. The tapes like that were precious. But the way Schiavone
Yeah.
announced the house shows is he did it more like tennis, like baseball on the radio. And obviously baseball on the radio was a huge influence for me too, as far as announcing.
Okay.
Because you don't need to describe everything. It's the opposite on radio, where you have to describe
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
Obviously, I could see that he just took a backdrop. So, the height, the elevation on that backdrop. That might be all you need to say, as opposed to
Right.
say he took a backdrop or so and so executes a backdrop. We see it.
Yeah.
So throw a little description on it to emphasize the point. Awkward landing on the backdrop.
Yeah.
Something. That's all you needed to say. But Schiavone did a really good job on those and was calling it like baseball because he was a baseball announcer. That's where he came from. That's what he was still doing. So those were my guys. Jim Ross was very excitable. I liked him, but he wasn't my favorite. He was probably fourth or
Right.
fifth on the list. I like Bob Caudle better than him. Caudle was another Crockett
It
announcer.
wasn't Buddy Colt or Coach John Heath, huh?
They were a little dry. A little
Yeah.
dry.
I remember they had a spin-off show, and once in a while it was Stan Rhodes and Coach
Stan
John Heath.
Rhodes. I
Yeah.
don't even know that name.
And yeah, it was called it was a Florida it was like called the World Class Championship Wrestling, but it was a Florida, it was the same thing as the Florida thing. And it would
Yeah.
be Coach John Heath, which I loved Coach John Heath because he um like I told you, he used to send me posters. I used to set up the ring in his towns and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the coach was always a really cool guy and everything. I wish I would have been able to went full circle with him to be able to reconnect with him after I got into the business, but I never did. I was able to with Gordon Nelson. That helped me set up the ring. I was able to with Gordon Solie because through WCW when he came back up there announcing and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So a few of those guys I was able to do that too, but um, I do remember once in a while, Stan Rhodes would be out. It was Buddy Colt, which is probably the nicest guy ever in the wrestling
I
industry. If you
never
ever
met
had,
Buddy Colt. I would have loved to have
I
met him.
met him at a WWF show that you actually booked me and Cliff on. It was in
Ah,
Tampa, and I think
yes.
we had the night off and everything. But we still got great catering and the payday. And he's like, "Come on, man, let's get out of here. We already got our money. Let's go." And that's how my imitation of Cliff was. And
Not
I'm
far
like,
off.
"No, bro, man, I'm talking to Buddy Colt." I
Right.
grew up watching him, even though I thought he was a very boring announcer. I still liked him because it was Buddy Colt. So
Yeah.
I was sitting there for an hour. I was sitting there and of everyone there, because it was in Tampa. He was coming there where he lived. He was coming to see, pop in and everything. And it's crazy. A lot of the guys were just like ignoring him. And I was like, oh man, that's Buddy Colt. I went over, "Hey, Mr. Colt, I want to introduce myself to you." And I told him I grew up watching him, all this and all that. And he sat there for a couple hours just talking to me about everything I wanted to talk about. It was the greatest thing,
That's
but I
amazing.
remember them. Coach John Heath and Buddy Colt was hosting the show once, and I'm like, as a kid, I was like, "Oh man, this is brutal."
That was like,
And I
yeah.
was like 13 years old at the time.
That was yeah. They were paint dry, boring at times, but they were infotainment in that regard because who was you learned what was what in terms of wrestling. And of course, Coach John Heath, very steeped in his amateur roots, and
Yeah.
Buddy Colt, pros pro, and kind of just like the way Florida is a transient state. I was from New York.
Yeah.
You came from Michigan. Buddy Colt was from upstate New York, as was Don Curtis. Both of those guys came down,
Hmm.
and they were both very influential in Florida, not just in the ring, but they were also promoters. They also booked a little bit. They did commentary. They were used and useful. It's funny how a lot of the stars of Florida came from other places. The first guy that we talked about was Sir Oliver Humperdink. He came from Minnesota,
Oh
but
wow, yeah,
very much was a Florida institution. He was the last one that was there practically, and
yeah,
he got his opportunities in both WCW and WWF, and was well earned. But my God, he was in the ring
yeah,
almost every night in Florida getting his ass beat.
yeah. There was not a single person that would tell you, even to this day, all the guys that are still live in Florida, they always when the Humperdink comes up, everyone goes out. They're like, "Man, this is the greatest guy
Yeah,
ever." Just like so nice.
worked his ass off, got everybody that he worked with over.
Yeah,
Uh, Whether it was some guys it was easy for him, it was Ernie Ladd. Other guys it was a little more work. And then of course when JJ came, and JJ was Dusty's assistant, it was a little bit of
yeah.
competition. So one would go out, the other one would come in, and they
Hmm.
spread the wealth around that much. But
I
again,
did
I
get a
don't.
clothesline from him on the
Who?
WCW match when he was managing the Freebirds.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, Jimmy Garvin threw me into him, and Humperdink gave me the clothesline. I did it like a 360 bump outside the ring.
You're too much. You got to put him
Hey,
over though, right?
it was Humperdink, of course. Same thing like Harley Race when he was the manager for Vader. When I saw that the one time I was wrestling Vader, I was like kind of excited because Harley Race was the manager. And I was like, this is Harley Race, one of the greatest, NWA, traveling world champions of all time. So I was like, I went up to Harley and I'm like, we're talking. I'm like, hey, you want to do something? And he's like, sure. And another time, he was managing Hercules Hernandez when he was when he was the Invader for WCW. I
Mm-hmm.
wrestled Herc's first match as the Invader. And I think I had to call the whole match because he was so freaking nervous,
God,
you know. Uh,
that was
And,
Hercules though. That was his
and
whole story.
he was a super nice guy too. And I'm like, okay, don't worry, Herc. I said, well, I'll get you through it. So of course I added some stuff in with Harley, and when we got him to the back, he's like, hey, was everything okay?
Mm-hmm.
He's asking me, and I was just like, it's just like, wow,
Are you?
because we
Yeah, I'm
talk
like,
about
are
this
you kidding
show,
me?
and
What? You're
yeah,
Harley
exactly.
Race.
We talk about this show, where it comes from in ring, talk about the correlation to being an extra jobber, enhancement guy, and stuff like that. But still, someone like Harley Race is coming up to the enhancement guy to say, "Hey, was everything okay with you?" You know, you know, did he care? I guess he came up to ask me. He went out of his way to ask me. It's not like I was going up to him saying, "Hey, what do you think?" Stuff
Yeah,
like
no.
that. I'll tell you another weird, I mean, kind of cool um, thing was is I was walking the hallways and I was by myself, and this kid was back there. It was Ric Flair's son, and
Who, Reed or David?
hey, what's that?
Was it Reed or David?
It was Reed.
Oh, okay.
Reed was probably 8 or 9 years old, and he's like, hey, you're Kasey Thompson,
What?
and I'm like, shit, this is Ric Flair's son, knows me by name. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it might not seem like a lot, but it's sometimes you just think, when I'm there, I'm doing my job, I'm putting the
Yeah.
guys over, this and that. I'm kind of like there, but not like a kid. You're seen, but you're not heard, kind of thing. But then you get walking through the hallways, and Ric Flair, the greatest wrestler of all times, his son, knows you by name, first and last name.
Right.
It's and this was like some obscure place in, Georgia, or, somewhere, South Carolina, North Carolina, somewhere like that. But, it's just kind of funny how those kind of things happen.
What you did, you cannot just say I was just a cog in the wheel. Um, because it's easy to feel that way if you're, a producer, if you're not on camera, but you're on camera. You are
Yeah.
physically giving your body for these guys, and they were benefiting by your generosity.
Right.
If you wanted to, after a while, you were a good enough worker to where you could sandbag somebody and make them not look so good. You could take
Oh,
crappy
sure.
bumps. You
Yeah.
could, not drop spots on purpose. You're not throwing the match, but I mean, you could just kind of sandbag and not look that great.
Some guys could just take over because they forgot their own spots they called.
True, true, and yeah, at that point, well, who are we giving the job to? We're
Yeah.
we should hire him and not you. I've heard that more than
Oh,
once.
I've had agents come up and say, "Hey, can you do us a favor? Can you just make them look good tonight?" I'm like, he's the one. I give you, Bagwell was that way when he first started.
Yeah.
I heard him do it with Flying Brian. Hey, make him look good. Because Flying Brian would call literally hours and hours worth of spots in the back and be going over it nonstop. He wanted to go a million miles a minute, and stuff like that. So, another one, Van Hammer, you know.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was obviously those guys did not have the benefit, but Bagwell a little bit of work, Flying
Yeah.
Bryant a little bit, Van Hammer no, hardly any. Came from the Maryland Indies. They weren't
I mean, he looked
exactly
like $1 million until he
right.
was got into the ring,
I know,
you know.
and you, it's like some guys got into the business too late
Yeah.
because they would have been a main star for 15 or 20 years if they would have been around during the territory days. I always say that about Al
Oh
Perez.
yeah.
Al
Yeah.
Perez had everything you could ever want. But by the time Al Perez came around, the business had consolidated and the opportunities to
Yeah.
become world champion were fewer and fewer, and other places for you to go to be the man without being the man were
Yeah.
fewer and fewer. So it
I
was a
remember
lot.
sending our tapes. Remember sending our tapes to WWF and talking to Cornette because that was, he was in talent relations, and he
Mm-hmm.
was like, this was a few years earlier in the territory days. You guys be working every night of the week,
Yep.
and he's like, it's just, just tough right now. There's not that many spots, and the whole,
Sure. And
routine.
that wasn't office speak.
Yeah.
That was legitimate because then a few years later, Cornette had a whole roster full of guys in OVW. Yes, we were always going to take the Brock Lesnar's and the Shelton Benjamins and the Randy Ortons and
Yeah.
the John Cena's, but we had to fight scratch and claw to get Rico Constantino a spot. And even then, he wasn't a full-fledged wrestler. He was the designer, for Billy and Chuck. He was side piece. Nick Dinsmore had to become Eugene. We fought tooth and nail to get the Basham, to get Doug Basham on TV, Damage on TV. They wound up being
Yeah.
brothers, even though they were in blood feud in OVW. Some of that stuff was done despite Cornette, I believe. But nevertheless, it was like these guys are
Yeah.
good and they can't even get a spot. And the people who aren't in OVW are even that further removed from that group. So it was very tough, very, very, and tough
Now,
to tell you guys too.
yeah. Speaking about managers, Paul Bear, which came through Florida as Percy Pringle.
Yes, let's get to him.
Yeah.
Obviously, you had to know him through, of course, his dealings with the Undertaker, and you saw him quite a bit at TVs and such.
Yeah.
What a good guy! Obvious,
Mm-hmm.
just a tremendous guy. Did you ever get to hear him sing his favorite George Jones country songs?
No, I did not.
Man, love George Jones. And we would tease him all the time. Oh, no show Jones, all this and that, because George Jones was, notorious for not making his dates or whatever. And, you couldn't speak ill of George Jones, who was still
Yeah.
alive at the time. But
I remember. I remember, Florida show. It was Fort Myers. Is back when Barry Horowitz was Jack the Loser Hart, and he
Right.
was losing every match and everything, and he lost a match. And Percy Pringle came in the ring, was throwing a fit and everything, and he's like, no, no, he pulled his trunks, and so Percy schoolboyed Jack Hart, Barry Horowitz, and the referee did a quick 1, 2, 3 real fast, and they rang the bell again, and they said, now he's 135-0. I mean, it
Oh,
was just little things like
jeez.
that. It was funny. It was a house show thing, but it was, I mean, but the people were popping like crazy over that. I mean, it was huge, you know? It
There
was,
was, yeah, that type of stuff that you could do on those types of shows is amazing when you think about it, because here they were, and this was the big game in town. This wasn't like some little outlaw show in the middle of nowhere. This was one of
right.
their main towns that they promoted and booked at least every week, maybe a couple of weeks. And here they are playing ha-ha, but
Yeah.
also doing business at the same time. That's just
Yeah.
brilliant. I love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I've been watching a lot of old YouTube stuff. I did run across some new stuff last night on YouTube. I guess it's Scott Nomore's promotion up in Canada.
Oh yeah, Maple Leaf Wrestling, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the production level is really, really good. They must a lot of TNA crossover, it looks like.
Sure. Uh,
But it looks like they had a pretty good house in there.
Running the old Maple Leaf Gardens, which was
Yeah.
downsized a few years ago. It's the Mattamy Athletic Center now. It's a college um, a college gym, multi-purpose
Oh,
venue.
okay.
Ring of Honor ran there a few times. Didn't sell nearly as many tickets as Scott D'Amore did. Um,
Wow.
but it was, yeah, it's a great building and history. They still have, because like I said, they've kind of downsized it, retrofitted, but there are way, way, way up top. You go and you take escalators and elevators, and then you look up, and they've actually taken the time to mount a chair on the wall and say that
Oh,
this
wow.
was like the furthest seat from center ice, center ring, because it was also where the Maple Leafs played, and it was, of course, where
Oh,
Maple
wow.
Leaf Wrestling was from, and so all those matches with the Sheik and those guys, and then Ric Flair, and
Yeah.
then after that, Savage, Hogan, Piper, etc.
Right,
Uh,
right,
the Tunney family promoted that, but you just
right.
looked at that chair, and they had taken the time to sort of like paint it, this little mural, and
Oh,
you can
really?
kind of like gauge, you're like 50 feet from the chair, and you're looking down, and it's like, damn. But that must have been like, some young fan, some old fan, some fan sat in that chair, whether they were watching hockey or whether they were watching wrestling or whatever it was, and were
Yeah.
having the time of their life, even though they could not have been further away than that physical point. Um,
You hear the reaction is like 30 seconds later once it reaches his way up to you and everything.
yes, the the finish happens 1, 2, 3, and then he reacts like half a minute later because he
Yeah.
finally got
But
the
I did
news.
watch I watched they had a gauntlet for the new Canadian champion, and I was impressed with the production. I thought it was really well done.
Scott knows his stuff. He knows TV. He's got a good relationship with a lot of boys, and is able
Yeah. Oh
to
yeah.
pull some strings and make things happen. Obviously, the what happened with him and TNA was just time for a change, and the company's gone in a different direction now. But
Right.
yeah, if he can make he's going to be fine. He's got all that.
Yeah.
He's all mobbed up and everything. He'll be fine. Um,
I,
don't worry about a thing. Um, when you look at somebody like Percy Pringle, um, not a fan. Paul Bearer, of course, was a fan. I loved Paul Bearer. Just thought he was like so cool with the Undertaker, and
mhm.
to me, that's just an amazing. You kind of be patient and bide your time. But Paul Bearer personally did a lot of stuff. He was doing a lot of stuff
Yeah.
in Florida. He was doing a lot of stuff in World Class. In fact,
Oh
he
yeah.
showed me where his office was. We drove by, and he said, "Stop, look, you see that
Oh
window? Yep,
really?
yeah, right out that,
Wow.
driving past the Sportatorium, going to the building." He said, "You see that window?
Oh, that's
Yeah, the
cool.
one underneath the T in Sportatorium. Yeah." He said, "That's where I would sit. That was my desk was on the other side of
So he did
that window."
besides on camera work in
Yep.
ring work, he did behind the scenes
Oh
stuff
yeah,
with
publicity,
world
making
class.
sure, yeah, making sure the posters got out, making sure the press
Gotcha.
releases were, the cards were released to the newspapers, all the
Yeah,
advertising, checking
a
up
lot
on the
more went into it than it does now. With the internet and everything. So
yeah, it's a it's a lot. Oh, Metropolitan University. Is that the name of it in Toronto? Thank you, Skunk Baxter. I appreciate you. He has a he has a question that I'm going to ask, and I don't know if you are interested in such, but because we really haven't talked a lot about it here on the show. But he's Daryl from Toronto, and he wants to know if we're watching the G1 this year. I'll be watching it. What say you, Kasey Thompson? You have any interest?
if you're gonna watch it, then I'll watch it. Just tell me where to see it at.
Okay, njpwworld.com. I'll flip you a password, but it's a long thing. People check in and out. They'll watch the first couple, and then it gets a little quiet, and then the last week or so it really starts to ramp up. My
Right.
favorite, if they held the old schedule, and I'm not sure when it starts, but generally it was about a month long, so it would start in the middle of July and it ends in the middle of August. And what
Hmm.
I always said is my favorite week of the tournament is the last week of July, because we've gotten through the first stretch and we've got the go home stretch to go. And that second week,
Right.
that third week can really be sneaky good matches and quiet.
Right.
Some under the radar stuff that are always gems, but
Right.
they obviously don't. They'll front load the tournament with some star matches.
Right.
They'll load up the back end to go home. Um,
But the middle is the meat of it all, the
the
good
middle is
stuff.
the meat, and that's where the story
Yeah.
is told. Like if you win, yeah, Zack Sabre Jr. is now the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, and that might be where he drops a fall, and he
Yeah.
drops one, he drops 2 points to somebody that he should beat, and then that becomes the catalyst for the fact that he's playing catch up the whole time. Every once in a while, like you'll have the story like they did in AJ's first year in the G1 where um, he's chasing the whole Okada's chasing the whole time, chase, and
Right.
eventually overcome at the end. And when champions lose during the G1, they always make good on those losses, those victories by their opponents. That there will be a
Right.
challenger for a September match and an October match, King of Pro Wrestling, depending on who it is. Obviously, the higher profile, and we would say that so and so pulls an upset. Don't expect this to be the main event of a big show like King of Pro Wrestling, but
Oh.
this might be your September main event, because they're not going to give, and again, it's about business. They want to sell
Yeah.
tickets, so they know that Zack Sabre Jr. versus average guy is only going to sell an average amount of tickets, but it might be better in a B
Right.
town that hosts the September big show as opposed
Yeah.
to October, which is Tokyo Ryogoku and King of Pro Wrestling. They need to do business.
Yeah.
They need a marquee, and if
Of course.
Zack Sabre Jr. wins the G1 and only loses once, and he loses once to kind of a so-so guy, well, they'll find a good opponent for him to have in October, as opposed to it
Right.
being the only match he lost was to so-and-so. He should wrestle him. Doesn't always work like that. And we would shoot with it.
Right.
So it's fascinating. Obviously, the G1 this year, because New Japan is completely in flux. And even Hiroki Goto, who was the champion up until a couple of weeks ago, injured elbow, he's out.
Oh
Zach
wow.
beats him, takes the title. Um, he has to be a favorite, but Tetsuya Naito is gone. Okada is gone. This is Tanahashi's last. So Tanahashi
Oh
is going to
wow.
be the big sentimental favorite for every single match. Guys had to fight to
Right.
get their way in, household names like Yoshihashi and others. So it's going to be very interesting to see who comes out on top. Obviously, I love David Finlay. I think Finlay is right there for the finals, but Jeff Cobb is not there this year. There have been guys that
Yeah.
have been in this tournament the last 6, 8, 10, 12 years that aren't in it, that you used to be able to count on to be in the mix, and now it's the field's more wide open than ever. And obviously, we keep
Yeah.
saying the next generation of guys has to step up, and it's time for one of them. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But
Right.
yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll give our thoughts here on the In Ring Wrestling Podcast, because why not?
Yeah, and you know Jeff Cobb's my cousin, right?
See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Jeff
Yeah,
Cobb was your cousin, but that's good.
yeah, Jeff Cobb is my cousin. Might not
Jeff
be that
Cobb.
Jeff Cobb, but there is a Jeff Cobb, my cousin, though.
Oh, sneaky.
My mom's maiden name is Cobb.
So there you go.
Yep.
See?
So he's probably my cousin.
And now they've changed his name to JC Mateo.
Yeah, well, you know, I know Miss Jeff Cobb.
Yeah, we all know him as Jeff Cobb. Listen, if you
Yeah.
were a Samoan, by the way, chances are
Oh,
pretty good, Kasey, that you would be in the WWE right now because
yeah,
they
that's
have
probably
brought
true.
in just about every family member that there is. And I keep waiting for like the whole spin-off show. Like the entire bloodline, all of them. They could just be their entire roster, good and bad on one side, and then fill it out with
Samoan Championship Wrestling.
well, just call it the bloodline, and it's a lot of
Yeah.
drama and a lot of vignettes and an occasional match. But it's always great. I
It,
love their stuff.
that sounds like their current product, isn't it?
It is. It's kind of the way it is. And obviously they're trying to rebuild Cody down. They have him win the King of the Ring. How would you feel? How would you do on a flight to Saudi Arabia? Would you be
I would
okay
get a
with that?
lot of sleep in. Yeah, I'd get a lot of sleep in.
Yeah.
I love sleeping on long flights. Yeah, doesn't
Oh,
bother me a
God.
bit.
I can't sleep on a plane. I don't know what it is.
Couple Mickeys and I'm out.
Yeah,
The
I
key
don't know.
is the problem with these young kids now, or they take a bunch of somas at the gate. You got to wait till you're on the plane and they're already taking off. They can't kick you off then. Take your somas then and pass out, and you're good to go. I've never been kicked off a plane in my life.
Yeah, because they're they're 35,000 feet in the
Huh.
air.
Yeah,
Didn't
they're
you
not
ever
gonna
worry
say,
about
"Can you leave, please?"
Didn't you ever worry about peeing your pants or something?
No, I have really good bladder control.
Okay. See, that's the
I don't
part
wake
that's
up during
scary.
the night. I don't get up during the night to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, but
I
there's
sleep
something
through the whole night. Yeah,
I know, but there's
I'm good
something
like
weird
that.
about just being on a plane, and I worry that people are like I'm talking in my sleep or I'm waving my arms around because I get nuts like that.
Are you
Um,
missing the eyebrow when you wake up?
Jimmy. All right, so let's talk Jimmy Hart because I had a dream about Jimmy Hart a
Oh,
couple nights ago. By the way,
what's that?
Jimmy Hart. I had a dream about him a couple of nights ago,
Oh, okay.
and I
Do
forget
you
what
hear
we
the
were.
fireworks or the explosions? It sounds like I'm in Baghdad right now.
I don't know.
It's
Are they
like
lighting them off?
crazy. Yeah, crazy. Hey, the 4th of July is not today. It was yesterday or day before.
It was recent,
Yeah, Friday.
and now
Hey,
it's
enough of that.
you
The
can't.
hell? I'm trying to do a podcast here.
They can't
Sorry.
hear you, and we can't. I don't think we can hear the fireworks. I know I can't.
Yeah, I got this high-tech mic that kind of drowns out
I
everything.
know you got all this. Okay, so Jimmy Hart obviously was Memphis born and bred, and got into the
Sure.
business through Jerry the King Lawler. But of course, since then, transitioned away from Lawler and became Hulk Hogan's sidekick in a lot of business
Yeah,
ventures. Talk to me about.
everywhere.
I know you've had experience with Jimmy Hart. I know you've worked with him before.
Sure.
Give me some Jimmy Hart thoughts.
Man, he is he's a good guy. I mean, he's involved in everything. He's like Jimmy's always resurfacing everywhere, you know. He was with Hogan, and I remember um a good friend of mine, Kevin Sullivan, when he opened his gym down uh Tavernier, right by Key Largo, in between Key Largo and Isla Mirada, called Tavernier. He opened up a gym called Froggy's Fitness, and he's like, um, hey, come down. I'm doing my grand opening and everything. I'm like, sure, because I used to go hang out with Kevin down there. He had a nice house right there on
Mm-hmm.
the Cove side and everything, with a little house, on their property where I stayed in there all the time. So he said, hey, I'm having a grand opening. I watched them build the whole gym from the foundation all the way up and everything. So I'm like, sure, yeah, I'll go down there. So he called me. He's like, yeah, man, Hawk called me and was like, hey, let me do you a favor. Let me do the grand opening for you. So, you know, he's like, devil, you've always taken care of me. Let me take care of you and help you and all that. And he's like, sure. He's not charging him a penny and anything. So Hulk came in and did the grand opening. Of course, you know who was there with him. Of course, was Jimmy Hart,
Jimmy
because
Hart.
Jimmy's with him all the time. It was actually His son Nick, Jimmy, Bubba the Love Sponge, who was with them
Oh
too.
my gosh.
So I guess a few things have changed over the years. But it
Yeah.
was a really grand opening, great grand opening for Kevin's gym and everything. And his goal was to have 50 pre-sold, and for the year he wanted to do 300 members after the first year. And because of Hulk coming in doing the grand opening and everything, he ended up doing 350 pre-sold memberships. So before he opened the doors, he did more than he wanted to do his first year because of Hulk Hogan. So
Wow.
Hulk came in, Jimmy Hart was there. I met Bob Seger that day because Bob Seger came up with remember referee Mickey J. Mickey
Oh
J.
yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
Mickey J.
Mickey
Definitely.
Henson. Yeah, yeah.
They
He
were
brought
friends.
yeah, down in the Keys. Yeah, he's brought him up. He said, "I've
Wow.
always wanted to meet Hulk Hogan." Well, come on, let's go meet him. So, but yeah, Jimmy did all the music for all the WCW. You know, I believe he did a lot for WWF at one point too.
Right. There
And
was.
yeah, he did. It's just yeah, he's been around for decades and decades and decades. You know, and he still looks the same age as he did all those years ago.
Saw him a couple of years
He was
ago in
always a really
person.
good guy. He always treated me well.
Yeah, always fantastic. Still a nice person. Saw him a couple of years ago in Beckley,
Yeah.
West Virginia, and it looks great. We laughed and joked for a couple of hours. We had a blast.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, his claim to fame prior to wrestling was he had a one-hit wonder. You know,
Yeah.
Keep On Dancing with the Gentrys, and that was their one
Yeah.
hit. And he's parlayed a one-hit wonder career into now 50 years of being active
Mm-hmm.
in pro wrestling, and has certainly, not stopped, not slowed down, and is fantastic, but will forever be known as Hulk's guy. That's his
He's
ride or die
really
now.
yeah, he's really underrated though. I mean, he doesn't get his due. I mean, the knowledge he knows of wrestling, he's not up there with all those other guys, but Jimmy knows his stuff about the wrestling business.
Was he a guy that would give finish ideas or spot
I mean,
ideas?
he was in the booking committee with WCW.
Or was he just looking out for Hulk's interest or Brutus's interest, or was he there to try to get
No,
other guys over?
no, he had the paper rolled up in his hand, going from guy to guy. I mean, he was there even when Hulk wasn't there. You know,
Okay.
he was on the booking. You know, I won't say the committee. He was in the booking staff with Kevin Sullivan was the booker. Then he had Orndorff and Terry Taylor, Jimmy Hart, Arn Anderson. You know, so it was Jimmy was a guy that had power.
He
With
could produce
WCW.
TV. He could produce TV.
Yeah,
He could produce matches.
sure.
I know that he was, very helpful in getting the Glamour Girls over, which was not something that a lot of guy managers did. There was very little crossover. If a woman came into a territory, even if it was the
Right.
fabulous Moolah, she would not necessarily, even though she was a world traveling heel champion, she would not come into the territory and be automatically aligned with whoever the heel manager was. They
Right.
kind of kept those. They didn't cross those streams. But Jimmy
Right.
was a guy who was willing to help the Glamour Girls get over, and Leilani Kai and Judy Martin were the beneficiary. They had a nice run.
Yeah. So we're talking about this whole episode of managers. Who was your favorite manager of all time?
For me, it's got to be well, and of course we've left out the best name. We haven't gotten there yet, but you've got to
Hmm.
look at Bobby Heenan.
Oh my God. What a great guy. Oh,
Yeah, we got to talk about Bobby Heenan for everything that
sure,
he could
absolutely.
do.
I totally forgot. How did I forget about Bobby?
I don't know. You just
Have you had a phone conversation with Bobby before?
no, I did not.
Oh my gosh.
I did an
It
interview with him.
was
I went to
like,
his house and did a long interview with him.
okay, so you know how the interview was? Probably he cracked probably 100 different jokes, right? Same thing in the phone conversation when you're talking. He's talking, and it's like you're just laughing your ass off because it's
Hmm.
the funniest phone call you've ever had in your life.
Yeah,
Because he was just, that's how he was.
you were his audience.
Oh, yeah.
Shivani told stories about Heenan like it would be they'd be checking out of the hotel for, a first flight out, and he's hooking the cord of the floor polisher over his foot so he could trip when the girl calls him up to the front desk and send things flying. And just it's 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, and he's just
He's
trying to
always
make
on.
everybody laugh. You look at
Yeah.
what the bumps that he took, the effort that he gave, was fantastic. Was second to none. The best
He's an
bumping
incredible
manager.
worker too.
Yeah, best bumping manager of all time.
Sure.
And when you look at the way he had one mindset, and everybody was, as if you were against Hogan, he was with you, and Hogan was his arch nemesis, and he was going to tear down Hulkamania, and this is it. This is where it happens. This is where Hulkamania is destroyed, and of course, it would never happen. But then he would come back with someone else. That mindset, pervasive through every action that he did. He didn't necessarily like all the other heels, but if you were against Hogan, he liked you. And that allowed him to sort of be, well, the Samoans, they're savages. They eat raw fish. What do I care about the Samoans? Now, King Kong Bundy, on the other hand, that's an athlete. Look at that man. He'll be the one to defeat Hulkamania. So that was sort of his mindset. But yeah, just great commentary, great personality, great people at the WWF studio loved Bobby. They loved telling Bobby Heenan stories. He was awesome.
A quick Bobby the Brain Heenan story is when I was running MXPW TV, and this was near the end of it, and I was milking for probably a month the director of operations, which is like the on-air commissioner kind of role, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're milking it and everything. And I literally had people call me from in the business. Hey man, who's it going to be? I said, you just wait and see. And it was Bobby Heenan who was going to be. And I had him booked and everything on it. And he called me. He's like, hey man, listen, my agent called and I got to go do Letterman because he had a book coming out, right? And I'm like, oh man. He's like, sorry, but nothing I can do. I'm like, I got you. So I threw someone else in there. They kind of just did. I mean, Bobby was going to be great, and then he had to bail at the last second. It's part of the struggles of running a independent promotion that has TV because you don't have everyone locked in. So I was building this up, I was building up like it was the biggest thing ever in wrestling, and then, I just threw some, Punisher guy in there.
No,
big old 6'9" guy, but it wasn't Bobby Heenan.
No, it wasn't Bobby Heenan. But then again, they didn't come up with the idea of the higher power. They didn't come up with Vince until the last day. So, there were other names that were kicked around, but no final decision was made, and they were out of time. And it's like, well, who's it going to be, pal? I guess it's going to be you, Vince. It wasn't me telling him this, but okay, he'll put the pumpkin head on and go out and be the higher power. So that's the way that was. When obviously Bobby Heenan is at the top. For me, J.J. Dillon, Cornette. Those are my top three. Jimmy Hart, a little bit in that realm. And of course, then there was like always the second tier. Whether it was Slick, Johnny Valiant, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, Downtown Bruno, Harvey Wimpleman.
Yeah, okay. So you got to give some love to Bruno. You got to give some love to Bruno.
Is he still with the company?
No, he is not. He is he's part of the town council for Walls, Mississippi, where he lives.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he had he lived in a trailer. And I don't know if he has a house now, but he had a trailer. And he said, yeah, it's really nice. I got the trailer out there and it's very quiet, and I got the chair and I sit outside of the chair. And then when I go inside, I chain the chair up. And I said, well, why do you chain the chair? I don't want anybody to steal it. That's our Bruno. We love him. He's great.
Didn't The Rock buy him something? A car or house or something like that?
Hooked him up because that was his guy.
Yeah.
He the first one to take care of him in Memphis. And Dwayne never forgot that, and definitely
Yeah,
hooked Bruno up.
yeah.
But he's on the
I'd love
town
to get a
council
hold of
now.
him. I'd love to try to get him on the show. He would be fun.
Let's remember that. We could do that. I would talk to Dwayne or to Bruno.
Yeah.
Be fine either way.
I don't know
We
if we
could.
want to have The Rock on the show. We're a little too big for that.
I know. I don't
Yeah.
want him.
I mean, we've been doing a lot of stuff lately. I mean, obviously someone's listened to the program because R-Truth, he's back on TV because of us.
You're welcome.
I think Tony Khan's going to be bringing Vince in because of us. I don't know. That's just alleged, but you got to tune in to find out what happens, I guess.
These are the allegations.
Yeah.
Kasey, give me your tops as far as managers. Give me your numbers. 1, 2, 3.
I think my as a fan, it definitely would be J.J. Dillon because of Florida wrestling.
Right.
But I would think in the business, I think it'd have to be Cornette, Bobby Heenan, and Jimmy Hart.
In that, sure. We appreciate.
And it can go in any order. Yeah.
I know. Cornette is like, Cornette. We would say, well, Cornette was the best, and then Cornette would even say, "Come on, I'm second in any list to Bobby Heenan."
Right. Yeah.
And in his mind, there was no better. So
right.
It's just interesting how all of this plays out. But of course, we want to know what you guys think. We want to know your thoughts. So send us, comments, social media. We'll follow up, and we'll give our thoughts about your thoughts right here next week. Kasey will be live once again next week, and next week I promise to have some sort of fan, as I could see my.
Oh yeah, you're sweating. Maybe I can make a pic with you, like sweat coming all everywhere shooting out of you.
This room has been famous, by the way. This is where I did all my New Japan commentary when I didn't travel. And one year, I was attacked by wasps in this room while I was live on the air.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it sucked. And, of course, I'm live and I'm stomping on them and I'm getting stung in my foot. And
is that the new Japan headset?
Yeah, this is.
Nice. See, the things you learn by tuning in, listen to us on this podcast.
$500 Sennheiser headset. I wasn't springing for this myself. It's not quite in our budget here at the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
One day. Okay, so that's going to do it for this live edition of the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. We'll be back with another live episode next Sunday. Of course, check out, follow, like, share, subscribe everywhere you see, whether it's shorts, whether it's full-fledged episodes, anything and everything related to the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. For the creator and our pal, Kasey Thompson, I'm Kevin Kelly, and we'll see you next week.
Check out TikTok. There's a lot of battles